friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I have another non-fiction graphic novel to share with you. I haven't read a non-fiction graphic novel in quite some time, but in the last non-fiction graphic review video that I posted, I got a lovely comment suggesting that I read Mouse by Art Spiegelman. Surprisingly, it was a graphic novel that I hadn't heard of, but it is incredible, and so I wanted to give you the information about what is housed in Volume 1 and Volume 2 of this text. So essentially, Art Spiegelman is the son of two parents who both survived the Holocaust, and he decided in his adulthood that he wanted to capture his father and mother's survival stories in a graphic novel. He made some really interesting choices with the way he wanted to narrate the story. The first one, which I think is most infamous if you've heard of this work, is that he chose to depict all of the Jewish population as mice, and then he chose to depict all of the Nazis as cats. The choice to do that I thought was really fascinating because it is such a symbolical choice. When you think of cats and mice and this dynamic relationship that they have where, you know, the cats are always hunting the mice and the mice are always victims, that really resonates with what was happening during the Holocaust. The idea that the Jewish population was being decidedly hunted down as prey and they had no defense mechanism against what was happening to them is so valid to their experience, and I thought that was a really interesting take. And while that was something that pulled me in initially to the story, the second thing that I thought was really interesting and different from other Holocaust stories that I have read is that this weaves in and out of when Art was trying to get the story from his father to also weaving in the actual account of his father's point of view. It's mostly his dad's story because unfortunately his mother committed suicide before he was able to learn fully her experience. And even though both of his parents were lucky in a way to have survived and also to have been kept relatively close together in different camps, but in the same larger camp of Auschwitz, Art really only gets to hear most first accounts from his father's testimony of what had happened. So I think it's interesting how he chooses to depict his father in his older age. And initially, I found it a little bit frustrating. Like I was like, oh, like I'd like to just stick with what happened. But as I got further in, especially in Volume 2 of the series, I had a better appreciation for it because it helped shine a light on the fact that just because people survived the Holocaust, it didn't mean that their life was automatically better. The Holocaust experience stayed with them the rest of their life. And that's something that I knew, but to actually see the small ways that it would still exist. You know, he talks a lot about the fact that as a boy, his father wouldn't do basic things, or he'd make comments that would reference back to the fact that he was a Holocaust survivor. And it was just a part of his everyday in ways you wouldn't necessarily think of, or things that you don't see, because at least in my experience, a lot of the texts that I've read that give survivor accounts, it ends when that person is liberated. It doesn't always go much further beyond post-liberation life, and I appreciated how this captured that. The third thing that I really appreciated about this telling of the Holocaust survivor story is that it really focused, especially in the first one, which says, "My father bleeds history." This one focused a lot on the buildup going into finally being captured. Something that Art's father was able to do, him and his family, for a long time, is as the situation was getting worse and worse for the Jewish population, they constantly found ways to delay being transported to a camp like Auschwitz. And it takes them a really long time to get captured and then finally transported to Auschwitz. The journey to actually getting them to be transported to Auschwitz is horrific, and it shows another layer of the Holocaust that, again, I don't think is always fully presented in stories that I have read as the accounts. And so I really appreciated the way it told that and talked about all of the survival that started well before people were being taken to camps and being systematically killed. The horrors went on for years prior to the mass transportations that existed, and I think this story really captures it. I thought that the illustrations, definitely there's a lot packed into these pages. It's more dense than a typical graphic novel that I have read. So these took me a little bit longer to get through than other graphic novels I have read, but I really appreciated the different takes that this offered about a Holocaust survivor's story, and I really appreciated the rawness and authentic nature that's presented in all aspects of this. There are even some moments in part 2 where Art Spiegelman, because these were published many years separate from each other, so in part 2, A Survivor's Tale, Art talks about his difficulty with the infamy that he was receiving from the first book, because it's an idea of, why am I becoming famous and glorified for telling my father's horrific story? So that breaking of the fourth wall is also really interesting. Overall, I think if you're looking for a really interesting nonfiction piece and you're somebody who wants to hear more from those who survived the Holocaust, this is an excellent little duology about a first person's account as told from a son's perspective that I think is a really important story to hear, and I highly, highly recommend it. As always, if you know of any graphic novels, specifically any nonfiction graphic novels, I would love to have you drop them down in the comments below, because I find that the graphic novel forum lends itself so beautifully to nonfiction, and I am somebody who, prior to finding this pocket of graphic novels, would not have described myself as a lover of nonfiction stories. It tends to be a genre that I don't always find the most engaging, but I feel totally differently when it comes to nonfiction graphic novels. I so appreciate you spending some of your day with me, and if you have read Mouse, I would love to know your thoughts on this graphic novel, and I'll talk to you in my next video real soon.